I think you have last week's on. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you who are joining us on YouTube this afternoon. All right. It's a little. Oh, now you have mine. There we go. Now you just have the sound up. See? Got it? All right. It's one of those days. Just one of those days. Sometimes being a pastor is like having two homes. Because you do all the stuff at your house, and then you do all the stuff here. And because this week it's all been about trying to get somebody in to fix the furnace, which they're doing tomorrow. They're coming tomorrow. Tomorrow. They'll be here nice and early. There. A little trouble with the microphone this morning. All right. We're going to jump right in. There's lots to do, but I just want to say so thank you for your patience for today. Just getting everything ready and jumping right into all of this. If you went through the reading this week and you're thinking, Pastor, when does the better stuff happen? When does the happier stuff happen? And all I can say is, yeah, it ain't this week. But I will say there's something really quite fitting about reading the book of Ezekiel right now, or frankly, any of the prophets. And it was funny because this is a conversation that Jackie and I had earlier this week, that one of the things that we have to remember about what's going on in the book of Ezekiel, and again, with all the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, right? This is all about the fact that Israel had gone so far away from God that God figured that there was only one way for them to ever get it through their thick skulls about how to be better, how to do better. And that was to let them fall as hard and as far as they possibly could. That there was the only way that they were going to learn the lesson was to learn the lesson in the most extreme way possible, right? And that is a hard lesson, isn't it? And we're getting a glimmer of that in the United States right now. Right? Because a whole lot of people thought what they wanted was to return the president to power. That's what they thought they wanted, right? Because they thought he was going to make life better for them, essentially by hurting other people not like them. I think generally speaking, that's what they thought. Those nasty woke people will finally get their comeuppance, and we, the cherished, whatever.
And now he's going to fight them all.
Well, and now, but what's going to happen is and no, because
When I heard that, I said, well, what are you gonna do? Take the least populated states and give it to them for a homeland?
absolutely not. No,
He
there.
doesn't care about the least of these.
Yeah, he does not. And that's fundamentally what it is that there's no compassion, there's no mercy, there's no love. And for anybody, and here's the thing, and this is where it loops back into Ezekiel. Some people, right, and a lot of people who probably voted for him, didn't think they would ever get hurt by it. They never thought that, they never, they didn't think, but they didn't think that they would be the one who suffered. They didn't think they were going to be the one who got hurt by policies or procedures or anything else like that. And now, what people may be starting to realize is that, oh no, this is going to be bad, not just for the people you don't like, which is what they thought. It's going to be bad for everybody. It's a sinking boat takes everybody down with it. If a rising boat or if a rising tide lifts all boats, a sinking boat takes everybody down with it. And that's what Ezekiel is saying, right? Ezekiel is saying, you guys have screwed up so badly that God is just like, okay, well, the only way you're going to get it into your skulls, into your hard hearts, is if I let it just go splat, right? That sometimes some people are so resistant to learning the lessons that they need to learn that the only thing to do is just to let them go. And for us in the modern world, we think, ew, yeah, that's not a great way of doing things. But at the moment right now, maybe some people need to learn a lesson good and hard. Because maybe they just can't get it through their heads that, yep, and it's just they can't see, and so God's going to make them see. And that's what's going on in Ezekiel, right? And that's why we're going to spend, that Ezekiel spends a lot of chapters describing, trying to change the people, but trying to describe the nightmare scenario that keeps hitting time and time and time and time again, right? And then they wonder, why are things so bad? Well, let me tell you. And so in Ezekiel, that's what's going to happen. He explains to them. And God's going to give Ezekiel these visions, these dreams, these experiences, these oracles, right? So that he can see how bad it's gotten and why God is essentially going to say, you know what? The exile is going to be the best thing in the world for these people because they ain't learning any other way. He sent other prophets before this. They know what they're supposed to do, and they just don't do it because they think that nothing bad fundamentally is going to happen. They've so convinced themselves of their own invulnerability, right? It's like talking to a 20-year-old, who thinks that they can conquer the world just because, and that nothing bad will happen to them, that they're always just going to be able to just spring right back up. Yeah, it ain't going to happen. And so this is what's going on, and this is why it's really important to actually read the book of Ezekiel right now, because it kind of gives us a sense of, oh, we've done this before.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't keep trying to do the same thing again. And so God's going to be real clear with Ezekiel. We can try to do the same thing and hope for different results, but no, it ain't gonna happen. And so what we get is in this big chunk of the book of Ezekiel that we're gonna look at this week, and it's like chapters 6 through 24, right? These are the oracles against Jerusalem. These are the oracles against other things, but essentially it's God showing Ezekiel how bad it's gotten and why God is really upset and what's going to happen next, because it may be the only thing that finally gets through. The only thing that breaks through is going to be the worst. And I'm going to guess most of us would not use that as our parenting advice, but sometimes if you are really confronted with a situation, it's got to be the thing. You know, I know a friend of mine who talked about who was an alcoholic, right? Who talks about the fact that he had to hit bottom before he realized really how bad it was, you know, and talked about, and he's been sober for 25 years now, something like that. But he had to hit because he said, I'd had bad days and I was able to still kind of patch it together and make it work, which meant that I hadn't learned my lesson yet. Until all of a sudden he realized that, yes, indeed, he had been sleeping under a viaduct for a few nights and had nothing left. And then, well, this is bad. And the doctor said, if you keep doing this, you'll die. Just that simple. God is at that point with the people of Israel. They have gone down the wrong path for so long, they don't know it's the wrong path anymore, and that all the prayers in the world ain't going to turn them around. This is the same kind of time period when essentially God says to Jeremiah, stop praying on their behalf. I ain't listening anymore. Because they won't turn around until they hit bottom. This is it. This is the end. They cannot learn any other way. And you think, that's a really harsh lesson. But I think we can see in our world today that some people may not realize the damage they're causing until they realize the damage they're causing to themselves. Yeah, until they're in it. And so that's what the prophets are talking about. And I think sometimes we can make it seem too spiritualized, too religious, too, oh, it's scripture, and then we are very good at saying, well, that happened, 2,500 years ago. Has nothing to do with us. Yeah, actually it does. And so it's really important for us to dig into that. So we're going to do a little bit of that today, right? There's a lot to read here. I mean, and if you did that, good for you, but whew, man, you'll probably have bad dreams for weeks, because a lot of this just feels like a bad dream that you can't wake up from. Because one of the interesting things about Ezekiel is that it's just unrelenting, right? Wave after condemnation and tragedy and what God's got in store and the way it's all going to fall to pieces and the different visions that Ezekiel is going to have where one of the spirits or the Son of Man or these, one of these celestial figures show him everything that's wrong and everything that's going to go wrong. And it's kind of, it takes the wind out of your sails.
Like that now, it's taking the wind out of us.
Yeah.
As you look on, see on the news.
Yeah. It's just that You know, we talk about doom scrolling. That's the book of Ezekiel. Or like, when does the good news happen? When do we? But Ezekiel's trying to make a point.
I
Yeah.
think that to the degree that we are, perhaps at that time they were basically in denial.
Yes, yeah. Denial is the right word, Jackie, that they were. They were absolutely. Well, and they are now. But yeah. We are walking on parallel paths, right? Where you don't want to admit how bad it's gotten and that it's going to affect me too. And I think a lot of people have convinced themselves that, well, when the hammer falls, it's going to hammer somebody else. They're going to get hit, and not me, because I'm one of the good people. When the hammer falls, it falls on everybody.
Can I say something? How many people you think voted for him that in the federal where he trying to give it everybody?
Well, there are going to be people who thought, you know what, all that bad stuff that's going to happen, it's going to happen to those people. I'm one of the good ones. And now that,
People that the last time they voted for him,
Yep.
did nothing good happen for them.
Yep.
They still did not.
right, because at least they could content themselves with thinking that the bad stuff would happen to people they didn't like. Right? All right.
It ain't no surprise.
It is not a surprise. And it shouldn't be a surprise. We've seen this story before. The question then, and so we'll kind of dig in this, so what was it, right? For us, it's one thing, right? But for the people of Israel, there were some issues that are really going to be highlighted time and time and time again. And this is really an important thing because we have to see that there's a real fundamental one. And it starts all the way back essentially in chapter 6, right? And there's this odd little thing where it's essentially the oracle against the mountains. And you're thinking, really? Does God have a beef even with the topography of the land? Yes, he does. And the reason for this is it's not so much the mountains themselves, it's the fact of what they represent. And what they represent is this abomination, is the word that we hear time and time and time again, about worshiping other gods, right? The biggest thing, and this is why I'm going to highlight this one, is because the whole issue is the question of faithfulness. I mean, if you want to reduce the biggest of these problems, right, down to one word, it's faithfulness. Or in the case of the people of Israel, unfaithfulness. There's a covenant. I will be your God and you will be my people. That's the arrangement. That's the agreement. That's the covenantal relationship. That's the bedrock of understanding the relationship between God and the people, right? God will always be faithful, right? God knows that as human beings that we can't be perfectly faithful, but man, he would like to get us to a point where we're at least 1% faithful, because it seems like all they can do is manufacture more and more unfaithfulness, right? If there's a way to go the wrong direction, the people of Israel have discovered it and have run in that direction. And that means worshiping other gods or doing other things. And so this is the beginning of the story in many ways, because what is happening is he's saying, you're running off, even now that you're in exile, you're running off after other gods. You got sent into exile because of your unfaithfulness, dallying with the Assyrian gods or the Egyptian gods or just about anybody else, the Canaanite gods, all those other people. And I'm upset with you and you've got to go into exile because you keep doing this and stop doing that. And then what do? They worship Babylonian gods. That's who's, it's like, how do you keep doing this? And what's interesting is because what God is going to say is like, okay, I thought exile was only going to be for a short while because that we figured, God figured was going to get their attention, that they're finally going to get the turnaround. And God's like, ha, 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 no, you're going to be in exile for 70 years because you didn't get it. And 70 years. Do you know why 70 years? It's 2.5 generations, right? At least. And so you got to let all of the people who started in exile die off first, because they're so bad that you're just going to have to let them all go and then start over with this remnant that is going to return back to exile. You got to just say, well, it's the same reason why they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, right? You people haven't learned your lesson, and so we're going to wait until the worst of them have died off, right? I mean, God was so angry with the people of Israel the first time that he didn't even let Moses get to the promised land, right? Moses, the great prophet, even he screwed up and like, fine, nothing. And so the exile is going to be almost twice as long as wandering in the wilderness, because they're still not getting it into their heads, because what is the repeated phrase? Did anybody know what the repeated phrase, how does he describe the people of Israel in Ezekiel? He says this time and again, and it's just delightful. Well, and not that so much, because Israel is a rebellious house. Yeah, stiff-necked, right? That's what they talked about in Exodus, but now God's just calling them a rebellious house. You are Israel, the people of Israel are a rebellious house. They have not learned their lessons. They still aren't doing the right thing. They're still not walking the way they're supposed to do. And so, fine, this is going to happen. And you see it. And you see it coming in chapter 7. And I'm just going to read a couple verses. I'm not going to read the whole thing because, after a while, it becomes. But if you look at chapter 7, start with verse 8. Soon now I will pour out my wrath upon you. I will spend my anger against you. I will judge you according to your ways and punish you for all your abominations. My eye will not spare. I will have no pity. I will punish you according to your ways while your abominations are among you. And you're thinking, oh, man, okay, we get the sense. And God's wrath, right, is to give them exactly what they think they want, which is to be cast out or to be away from God. God's like, if this is what you wanted, that's what you say you want. You want to be free, you want to do your own thing, fine. Go do your own thing. See how that works out. Oh, that's right. You did your own thing, and now you're in exile, and your city's been destroyed.
Because it's not just those, it's all of you.
Yeah, right.
Everybody did something.
Everybody did something. And it's an interesting thing because we'll see this later on, right? Where the people of Israel who are now in exile were saying, hey, God, relax. It wasn't us. It was our ancestors. And God's like, oh, no, it was you too. It was you too. Nobody is escaping this. Yeah, nobody's excluded. Nobody's exempt. You all have done the wrong thing. And so it's this imperative understanding that God is like, we're going to have to scrape you all the way back to the beginning, right? And so we get this really fiery language and these amazing images of when Ezekiel is taken up so that he can see all of the different places and where they've all done. And like in chapter 8, the repeated phrase that we get where this spiritual figure, this creature of heaven, is taking Ezekiel around and showing him all the bad things that the people of Israel has done, and then keeps repeating, you will see greater abominations than these. So if you thought that was bad, let me show you these people and what they did, right? And it's all the house of Israel. It's just people from Jerusalem and Judah and all the rest. And they're just saying, okay, they're unfaithful. They are terrible to the people who are in need. They don't worship God alone. And it's the power of it is it's in its relentlessness and its repetition. We never get a break. It's like if you've ever had that, the worst kind of bad dream is where you think you've woken up from the bad dream and then you're in another bad dream. That's this, rolling on top of them time and time and time and time again, so they get the point. And now remember, this is really important too. Ezekiel is writing while he is in exile. He's one of the ones in exile. And he's the one essentially narrating how bad it's gotten. And the only way to get out is to come clean, right? And that's going to take some work. It's going to take a lot of work. But in order to really drive home how bad this is, in the whole first part of the book, we barely get a moment to take a breath, right? Ezekiel really wants us to get, and he really wanted them to understand just how bad this is. And so he's going to start giving examples. And so we get the whole business of faithfulness, we get idolatry. And idolatry is essentially praying to other gods, right? And you're thinking, well, we don't do that, Pastor. I said, yes, we do. Sure we do. We may not call them other deities anymore. Well, and also, there are certain things that, because the best way to think about God, or one of the ways to think about God, is that God is our ultimate concern, right? First and last, Alpha and Omega. It's what you wake up with and what you go to bed with and everything in between. God is that greatest concern, right? Except for a lot of people have other greater concerns, right? Could be anything. Could be, it could be money, or what? Not coming to church, but they don't come to church because they think that they have better things to do, right? It may just be sleeping in on Sunday morning or sleeping off what they did Saturday night, whatever, But it's sloth, right, or greed, or envy, or any of the other things, and those become, a seminary professor of mine said that, yeah, well, and other things become our gods. Those things that consume us when we lose them. And what's really interesting is that this is one of our gods, isn't it? If you don't take your phone with you, you feel empty. You feel naked, right? Or if you leave your wallet, right? That is a household god, right? When I leave the house in the morning, I check to see if I have my phone, my wallet, and my keys. Congratulations, I've just pointed out my 3 family or household gods, essentially. Those are the things. If I lose those, I'm like, everything stops, right? And God's saying, okay, that's idolatry. And you're like, oh, that's a little harsh. And God's like, no, it's the truth. And we don't want to hear it. And so we pretend, oh, no, it's really not that thing. But really, we're like addicts. Just try to leave this at home for a day. I mean, I love people. Oh, I don't know what to do. It's like, you lived fine without it before this. It's a wonderful tool. It's a great tool. Everybody, there's nothing wrong with that. Not a problem, right? I have no problem. But it's just a tool. It's not a God. And what's that? Don't forget to pay the bills. That's right. Well, yeah, that's right. Or else they'll take it back. But we have that with little things. We also have it with big things, right? And that's what Ezekiel's pointing out. You have these other things. And what God is saying, I seem to remember, you shall have no other gods before me. Everybody's like, oh, well, don't bring up the 10 Commandments. That's just somebody's stuff that we post on a wall. We're not supposed to actually pay attention to those things, right? We're supposed to. And those are the ones that we always tend to forget. We tend to forget the first three and then focus on everything else, if we focus on them at all. Yeah. So this is what's going on. He's pointing these things out. One of the other things that he's going to point out is that there's people before the exile who were leaders in Israel, Jerusalem, Judah, and these are essentially what we would call wicked rulers, right? They devise, and I love these phrasing, they devise iniquity and they offer wicked counsel. Well, and it's not only that, it's just that devising iniquity simply means putting together plans that are purposely to hurt those people that you want to hurt. Right? That's what it means. It means that you're trying to find ways to do things that are so completely opposite of what God has called us to do, which is to do justice, love kindness, right? Walk humbly. If you're devising iniquity, what you're doing is you're not just stumbling into it, right? And this is the really important. You're planning it. This is intentional. You are saying there's good or there's evil. I'm going to plan to go that way. That's what you're doing. And you're going to say, oh, but I'm not doing anything bad. This is just, it's good for my family, or it's going to enrich me. And yeah, it's another god, right? And then offering wicked counsel is essentially, right now, the current administration is filled with offering wicked counsel. It's how to hurt others so that you benefit from it, right? And so, again,
you don't mean y'all.
yeah,
You mean me.
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, when we're talking about, I get enriched by this. The rest of you, well, that's the way that works. And so Ezekiel's being shown by the very inhabitants of heaven all of the things that Israel is doing wrong. And Ezekiel's job then is to say to them, just wait. This is not going to turn out how you planned, right? And in fact, it's like one of the things that Ezekiel will tell those who are devising iniquity and wicked counsel and offering wicked counsel is that your walls ain't going to save you. The power that you think you have isn't going to help you. That will be swept away as easily as everything else. And it would be like telling our billionaires today, your money ain't going to save you. Yeah. And that's exactly that, though, because he would never hear it. He wouldn't listen. But sometime, justice will come. Right? Justice will come. All right. Now, in the midst of all of this just relentlessly happy news, right? All this good stuff, there is a short reprieve in chapters 11 and 12 in which, and this may be a little bit out of sync on the timeline, but Ezekiel says, but a remnant will return. The exiles will come home. That's going to happen. It's going to take longer than you ever anticipated. And he's going to tell, and remember, Ezekiel is one of the first groups to get taken into exile. There's 2 waves of exiles taken. And he is writing to the ones who are still back in Jerusalem before Jerusalem fell and said, just because some of us are gone, don't take our stuff. Don't assume that we're gone for good. We will return. And don't think that you're going to escape that judgment. Don't think that you're going to escape God's wrath just because you're not in the first wave. It's going to happen. And then he's right back into it. And God's telling, you live in the midst of a rebellious house. And that rebellion is the problem, because they're rebelling not against anything else other than God himself. God told you how to live, and you're simply choosing not to do it, right? They have eyes to see, but do not see. They have ears to hear, but do not hear. Because they've gotten to the point where they don't want to hear it. And that's the dangerous place. That's where I think a lot of people are right now. We just don't want to hear it because we think we're going to be on the right side. We're going to rise above. We're going to be the ones that are going to be safe. I'm not going to get hurt by this. The leopards aren't going to eat my face. Yes, they are. And probably right soon. And so the question is, what are you going to do about that? All right. Well, we're not to that point yet, because Ezekiel's like, you still haven't learned the lesson. And so he pours it on, right? There's one where chapter 15, he talks about the allegory of the vine, the grapevine. And he essentially says, people of Israel, you are like the wood of a grapevine that does not produce fruit, which means you're useless. And the worst thing about it is that even as fuel, grapevine wood is essentially useless. It doesn't burn very well. And so what he's essentially saying is that not only are you useless in life, you're useless in death. There's nothing of you that is of any value whatsoever. The Lord is saying that to the people of Israel. You're no good. There's no reclaiming that. You have gone so far that there's nothing, right? Yeah, I mean, you guys would run me out if I preached like that on a Sunday. I mean, it'd be like, you're all sinners, you're all toast, it's over. Thanks. Mary, happy, go have brunch, and the reason is because they're a rebellious house. Even this, they're still not hearing. It's going to take them 70 years to hear this, right? It's going to take them 70 years to absorb the fact that it's them, not somebody else. And they're going to keep doing that. Oh, no, it's not me. And Ezekiel's like, oh, yes, it's you. Absolutely you, right? Likewise, one of the most uncomfortable parts of the book of Ezekiel is chapter 16. Because this is the allegory of the unfaithful wife. And it is hard to read because essentially this is and it's an allegory, which means that it tells a simple story, but it's about, right? And so this is about a man and a wife, right? She's born, she grows into adulthood, she's been abandoned, she's left naked, but the husband comes in and cleans her up and clothes her and gives her rings and a crown and luxurious clothes and all of this kind of stuff. And in return, she goes off as a prostitute, right? And she's not even, and this is really, she's worse than a prostitute because she doesn't get paid for that. She actually pays her lovers. And you're thinking, okay, well, that's alarming. This is what God is saying about Jerusalem. This is what God is saying about the people of Israel. He's the spouse, he's the husband who found her by the side of the road, all bloodied and naked, right? Just thrown away, essentially, by the rest of everything. And he took her in, he took Israel in, gave them everything. And then the moment they could, they ran off to everybody else. And not only did they not get paid for it, they actually paid for the experience. This is harsh. This is really uncomfortable kind of, and this is the kind of stuff that you're like, oh, Really, did we have to talk? Yeah, because again, it's really harsh in our ears and it's really uncomfortable in our modern ears. Well, and it's not only that, but it's just that Ezekiel really needed them to understand how far they had fallen and how what they had been given was a gift in the first place, right? God scoops the people of Israel out of, nothing and turns them into the people of the promise. And their response to this great grace is to not just not do well, but to run the exact opposite, right? They have been given the greatest gift, and they essentially throw it right back in God's face and make fun of him for it in the process. Insulting and all the... And so while it's a really harsh way of thinking about it, it starts to make sense that God is sitting there going, I have literally saved you from death, right? I took you out of captivity in Egypt, right? I raised you up in the first place. I saved you from captivity in Egypt. I've brought you to the promised land, and still, I've given you everything. I even sent prophet after prophet to try to get you to come back to doing the right thing. And after a while, you got to think, and this is after, right, way long ago when the people were rebellious and we got Noah's Ark. And he promised never to do that before, right? And so he doesn't. But that doesn't mean that he's not unhappy. And so here it is that God has done everything for Israel. And still, they act like this. Nothing. And not only do they not do anything, because even that would have been preferable. I mean, just be, apathetic or lazy or just, sit on your hands. They are actively running in the wrong direction. Willingly, gloriously running in the wrong direction. And God's just sitting there going, I don't get it. What in the world? And he's tried everything else. Tried every other way of getting their attention. You're going to have to hit rock bottom. You're going to have to go in order to understand. And so that's what we keep seeing. And so the whole first part of Ezekiel are these oracles against Jerusalem, against the people, trying to get them to understand what they're going to go through because of who they have become. Now, what's interesting is that we're going to turn next week into that God's not just irritated with the people of Israel. He's going to turn to all the other nations too and go, I'm the God of all, right, people? You're next. Because you could have done better too. We're next. All of us. Because here's the thing. And we're going to get to the point where we get to the end of the book of Ezekiel, and we're going to get to the oracles of hope. Because this is an interesting thing. There doesn't feel like there's a lot of hope here. Except you keep getting little snippets of it in which Ezekiel says a remnant will return. The exile will come to an end. Just as the wandering in the wilderness came to an end, just as other problems have resolved and we've moved forward. But you got to remember why or what you're supposed to be called to do. Because here's the thing. If we do that, fewer bad things happen in the world. It's really that simple. the reason that we are at an inflection point, say in the United States, that we've got a choice. We can either go really down the wrong path, or we can turn around or can turn away from it, is that there are a lot of people who don't like the solution, which will be of how to move forward, and that is, well, inclusion, justice for all people, right? Acceptance for all people, lifting up all people, loving all people. Because what we have is we have a group of people who are very, well, they think that the only way that they can build themselves up is to tear others down. That's it. I mean, fundamentally, that's what we're looking at. You know, the richest people in the United States, well, and that's what they want. And they think that that's the only way forward. And that's where we talk about, you know, they're so blind they can't even see how bad that is, how self-defeating it is. Well, it's worse for them, right? It is even actually, and they can't see it. Because if all of us, right, if they manage to wreck the economy or anything like that, guess what we're no longer do? We're no longer buying their stuff. I mean, and so that's the thing. And so what God wants us to understand through the book of Ezekiel is that there are certain fundamental things that if we did differently, we'd be on a better path. It all starts with this. Now, I'll end with this. It's faithfulness to God, right? But that's not a state of being. That's how we live, right? Faith isn't a thing you have. Faith is a life that you lead. And so being faithful to God isn't just saying, okay, God, I'll listen. It's doing what God has called you to do. And this is where all of us, right? Not just those people that we think are doing bad things, but we can do these things in our own lives too, and that is treat each other with dignity and respect. If somebody is in need, help them, right? All the people who are doing all these monstrous things, I don't have to like them, but we are called to love them. But that loving means to call them into a better relationship, right? And so we have responsibilities. We have a job to do. That's what it means to be faithful. There's a reason why it's called a covenant. You do this, I'll do that, right? We each have responsibilities. God has remained faithful to that relationship. Have we?
And we have the responsibility to, well, let's say, remind each other to remind each other.
Right. Yeah, we are called to remind each other, and Ezekiel even says that, right? That his responsibility is to point things out. He's got to speak the truth because if he doesn't, God says you're responsible at judgment for those people that you didn't speak the truth to. Now, if you speak the truth and they don't hear it and they don't change, that ain't up to you. That's not your worry. You don't have to worry. Your job, though, is to speak the truth. Your job is to point those things out. And that I would also argue that that means pointing those things out about ourselves. You look at yourself in the mirror and speak the truth to yourself. You know, that's your job. That's your job as much as because we love to point out other people's sins. We're really good at pointing out other people's faults, right? I mean, that's easy. We love doing that. There's a whole cottage industry of doing that. But our job is got to be also to be honest with ourselves. Yeah.
I tell my class that it's a great prophet Michael Jackson saying, you must start with the man in the mirror.
Yeah, yeah.
Just ask him to change his ways.
Yep, got to start with the man in the mirror. Got to, but Ezekiel says it's our responsibility to speak, right? And so it's like, like the Episcopal bishop from a couple weeks ago, she had Trump right in front of her and she spoke truth. That was her job. That's following in Ezekiel's prophetic call that if you've got somebody who is doing something terrible and needs to repent and turn around, you got to tell them. You got to take that chance. And she did, right? But it's also like, I talked a little bit about this on Sunday. So did people like Martin Luther King, right? So did any number of the other, people who said, wait, stop. You got to listen. You got to pay attention. You got to do these things. That this is not, I think it was Rosa Parks' birthday yesterday. And so, and sometimes it's actions, right? And so not moving was speaking truth to power. The brave souls who sat at the lunch counters, right? That's speaking truth to power. And not doing it isn't going to make the problem going to go away. It's going to just make it worse. And that's the other thing that Ezekiel understood, and that God was clearly making understood to Ezekiel, that if you don't say anything, they ain't going to figure it out. And so,
If you don't say anything, it's an indication that everything is okay.
right,
You're
yep.
okay with the way things are.
Yeah, right, exactly. That silence is essentially tacit approval, right? I mean, well, Richard Nixon used to say that he used to call a lot of America the silent majority, right? Because they didn't say anything, they must agree with him.
Right, you must agree, absolutely.
And you're like, what? Okay, I can see where you can go there, right? And I think that's true today, right? My guess is that the current administration will depend on people just not saying anything. Yeah, well, and,
So it means it's okay with you.
yeah,
If you not have anything to say about it, then, you're good with it.
yeah. If you don't say anything, then it must mean that you're okay. Yeah, and Ezekiel's like, you can't do that. And it's great because, what's that? And they are scared. Yep. Yeah, yeah. Oh, and exactly that's right. Yeah. And so the thing is, because Ezekiel had to have been afraid,
Yes.
right? I mean, how about, Jesus was afraid. Absolutely. Every prophet, who said, God says, okay, guess what? You get to go speak the truth to the people who won't listen. And you're like, oh, really? Can I? That's awesome. But that's why Ezekiel becomes so important for us right now. Because the people of Israel were on the wrong path. So wrong that God's like, I have no idea what to do with them anymore. So we're just going to let them go, and then we'll clean up the mess on aisle 5. And then we'll start over. Many of the other prophets will say, boy, does it have to get that bad? We'd like it not to have to get that bad. And God's like, we've tried everything else. And so maybe this is the way. Yeah. And so, and that, of course, and that's my attitude as well. It's like, do we have to go down the worst road possible? I'd really rather not. I don't want to get anybody hurt. Even those people I don't like, I don't want them to get hurt. Right? I don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't care, and this is one of those, I don't know if I'm a cynic or an idealist. I think I'm both at the exact same time because I don't want anybody to get hurt. But man, I know it's going to happen because people are people.
But we know what is the right.
We do know. We know what the right path is. And so this is the place we're going to end today. We know what the right path is. A lot of people say, oh, I don't know. Yeah, you do. You know. You know what the path to the promised land is. Not just to heaven, but the promised land, which means where all of us actually can make this work. We know how that's going to work because all we have to do is really pay attention to what Jesus told us.
Number 2 commandment, what? First one is love God and serve only one God.
Yeah.
And the other one is relate to each other like you would like to be related to.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah. And But boy, sure, a lot of people sure seem to think it is hard.
Yeah, and act like it is.
Yeah, it's like, what, you mean I have to be good to people? I mean, all the time. Even people I don't like. Yeah, yeah. How about doing that for a bit?
Yeah.
And it would have, there was a wonderful philosopher / theologian in the mid 20th century who said, if Christians actually lived the love that Jesus taught them, it would be as if the world discovered fire a second time. It would be that transformative. It would change everything. If we just lived in love, the way that Christ loves us. There it is, right? That's the thing. You're thinking, and so that's not just on the cosmic level, but in our own daily lives. That's where it actually starts. That's the pebble that rolls down the mountain, right? So that's where we start. And that's a good place to end for today. Next week, we're going to wrap up this whole business of the book of Ezekiel. And we're going to talk about the oracles against the nations, right? Because, again, God's not just messing with the people of Israel. He wants everybody to pay attention and do the right thing. And then the oracles of hope. How does Ezekiel talk about, where do we go from here? What happens next? What does God have in store, right? And so we'll do that next Wednesday, all right? Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Thank you for all of you who joined us on YouTube this afternoon. Don't forget, worship is at 10 o'clock here at Genesis every Sunday. And we will be back here next week to wrap up the book of Ezekiel. Thanks, everybody.